it off, more people will come along. But welcome everybody to another Guitar Night Live. I'm Daniel Jacobson. I'm here at the Ultimate School of Music in Dún Laoghaire. Every Saturday night, I'm chatting to a different professional guitarist, an Irish guitarist usually so far, and finding out about their journey with the guitar and how they approach it, and other guitar-related topics. Tonight, my guest is a guitar player who is very respected in Ireland and beyond Ireland as well. He's been playing with everyone from Van Morrison to John Scofield. John Scofield, if you didn't hear him, he's played with Miles Davis, so that's a pretty good gig to do. So many of you guys probably already know who my guest is, but some of you don't. This is partly why you come along, you come to meet these guitar players and find out what makes them tick and hear them playing, of course. So tonight my guest is Jimmy Smyth. Jimmy, welcome to Guitar Night Live. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. Delighted to be here.
And I should say as well before we start this, I'm going to pop Jimmy's PayPal link into the chat window there. If anybody feels like sending Jimmy some money, small or large amounts, are very welcome as you listen and learn tonight. They'll be there for you to do that. Jimmy was not feeling great today, so it's great that he's able to do this. So thank you again.
No problem.
So Jimmy, wanted to start with, when we chatted the other day, you were telling me how you began playing the piano and trumpet first.
Yeah.
What age were you when you started?
Very young. I was very young. My dad was a musician, and when I can't remember what I started playing first. My first instrument was trumpet, but I joined a brass band in Navan, where I'm from, and at the same time I was learning piano. So he said, look, I'll teach you here, but I think you should do grades as well in piano. So I did my piano grades. I did trumpet grades up to grade 6 or 7, but I was also a boxer at the time. I was a juvenile boxer. And when I got to doing my grade 7 or grade 8, I was fighting in the National Stadium for the Leinster Championships, and I got this tooth knocked out. So that was the end of trumpet for us. And at that point I had moved. I'd started looking at guitar anyway. I was very young. I'd been looking at guitar from about 9 or 10. But I finished my piano grades, but I'd lost interest in piano at that point, and it was all about guitar. However, my dad was great because we didn't have that generational thing where I'd be listening to, whoever, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and T-Rex and a lot of country guitar players. And I had a problem initially with guitar, thinking that all the stuff I knew in relation to trumpet and piano and music theory somehow didn't translate onto this thing here, right? This is a different, you're doing all this stuff kind of thing, and it's not, and there was a whole kind of, the zeitgeist at the time was that, great guitarists couldn't read music because it would ruin their mojo. This is the thing. And I kind of bought into that for a minute, and then my dad made it fairly clear. He said, there's nothing you can play on that instrument that can't be written down, and that was a kind of a eureka moment. I said, oh, okay, so all the stuff that you've studied, you can now put on this instrument, relate to this instrument. Now again, the guitar, as guitar players, I presume I'm talking to a lot of guitar players there, it's a very unwieldy thing. It's not laid out like a piano is. So when it comes to forming chords and stuff like that, it's a little weird. And the G major chord that's not really a G major chord. It's a G major on steroids. That's a G major chord. The triad. And so a lot of guitar players get confused with that stuff. And when I lectured in them for 6 years, I would go back to deconstructing that stuff for guys. They knew an awful lot more than they thought they did, and they also did an awful lot more than they needed to do. You know what I mean?
What they did more than they needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I would say play an E flat minor chord, and they would do like that. I say, okay, let's discuss that. You know what I mean? What have you got? You got a 5, a 1, a 5, a 1, a minor third, and a 5. You 3/5. You got 2 tonics. You've got that is undoubtedly an E flat minor chord, but that's an E flat minor chord. So in order, when we get into looking at triadic harmony and stuff, it's good to know that, okay, I'm actually, my idea of chords is not actually, it's a little skewed, as it were. So when you start looking at harmony, it's much simpler than you think it is.
Yeah, I remember some jazz teachers like Mike Nielsen and Hugh telling me early on, like, just you can play two notes, sounds good.
Yes,
Or three
a
notes.
dyad, absolutely, yes, of course. And we tend to, for whatever reason, rock music is. I'm a big fan of rock music. Don't get me wrong, but it's guilty in this, where there's these huge, big power chords, those kind of things. So you've no third there at all. So
Yeah.
effectively speaking, it's kind of a dyad on triads. It's 1 5 1 5 1 5.
And when you played the trumpet, did you play any jazz at that point on the trumpet, or was that?
Yeah, my dad was a sax player, so I was playing Dixieland with him, not modern jazz. Although around about the same time as I got my tooth damaged in the National Stadium, he brought me at about 12 to see Maynard Ferguson, who played only once in Ireland, but I was very young, and he managed to get me in. It was in the Montrose Hotel out there in Stillorgan, and I just couldn't believe that a trumpet could sound like that. And in fact, it had the opposite effect on me. I was now getting very serious about guitar, and I said, that's it for the trumpet. I could never make the trumpet sound like that. I don't even know what he's doing there. You know what I mean? Yeah. Super Fs and super feet all the time. Listen, it was quite a visceral experience listening to him play.
Did you have any experiences like that seeing guitar players?
Yes. 1974, I was 15, and I went to see, I was a big fan of Thin Lizzy, because I knew Thin Lizzy from a couple of years previous. I used to open up for them when they play in Navan, so I loved the band, and I knew Philip Lynott, I was aware of him. But they had Eric Bell playing with them, who I loved playing. So I went to see them in the National Stadium, funny enough, the same place. And my Aunt O'Drennan was at the same gig, even though we didn't know each other at the time. And it was another hugely visceral experience. It was Gary Moore came out at very late notice. He rejoined the band. It was a three-piece. They came on and they played, and he had two H&H stacks and that Peter Green Les Paul. And I was pinned to the wall. I'd never seen anything like that. It was so visceral, and he was such a visceral player. He was such a physical player. It blew me away. It knocked me out.
So when you went home after the gig, were you like practicing, trying to get to play the same kind of things you were hearing?
Yes, that's how we used to learn. There was no YouTube. It was either records, vinyl, or seeing somebody do something and trying to remember one or two things, going back home later on, hours later, whatever it was, and picking up the guitar and trying to remember what it was, invariably getting it wrong, and thereby developing a style of your own, sort of,
And what kind of things, what kind of music were you playing at that point? Like,
I was at that point, I had left school early. I was playing in a country show band when I saw Lizzy do that. That was a purely temporary thing. I wanted to travel a little, and they would play in Germany and England and Scotland. And I was 15, so I went to, but I had toured a lot before. With my dad, I toured from I was like 12 years old.
Wow. So from the age of 12, you knew you wanted to be a musician and play?
Oh yeah, there was never any question, And it wasn't forced. It wasn't forced on me. It was just the obvious thing is that I had no interest in. I had a lot of interest in literature and poetry and stuff, but I wanted to be a musician. That was it.
And did you think about how you were going to make career-wise? Like, did you look ahead and go, I have to get into better bands, or did you want to make your own band the main thing that you did?
That came a little later. Yes, I wanted to. I wasn't that careerist. I was more constructivist. I would see what's available and I would try and get involved in that. I would see what I wanted from music. I wanted to work with better players always, to learn from them, not just guitarists, because you wouldn't work with guitar players a lot, actually.
Sure.
Sax players taught me a lot. People, everybody from Paddy Cole to Richie Buckley, of a broad spectrum of people I would have worked with, because Richie and I are the same age. So working with them was very, very instructive.
Well, yeah. What kind of gigs did you used to do with Richie?
Show band gigs at the time, way back then. He was in a band called the New Blues. He doesn't like talking about this, but they were like these. The only way to make a living at the time because I'm not from Dublin. Richie was, but so in order to live in Dublin, one had to have a job. So you had to be making money to pay rent in a flat in Rathmines. So I would play with a show band, and they had to be kind of full-time jobs. You weren't allowed really. They'd be 5 nights a week anyway, and it was brilliant. I mean, with when I joined Paddy Cole's band when I was 16 or 17, we went straight to Vegas and then over to Toronto, and we were touring all the time. So anytime I wasn't doing that, we would do ad hoc gigs on Monday nights and out in various venues to bag it in or whatever. And Richie and I were constantly crossing paths at that point.
Sounds fantastic. Do you think that these days are there less opportunities for young musicians to gig and tour in that way, or do you think they're still there?
Yes and no. There are far more opportunities for musicians. See, you asked me, was my intention at the time was to get established where I'd have a car and some gear and some money, and then form a band of my own, because I knew that'd be like a loss maker in terms of money, right? I was writing songs, and it was like, that was my intention. But there's much more opportunity for younger players to do that. Ireland is still this is all pre-lockdown, pre-COVID I'm talking about, of course, because we don't know now. But prior to that, I used to say to my students, I said, I don't want to hear you whinging about no scene and stuff. I mean, this is still the only country where you can go into, if you can get a gig and you have a decent band, you can go into JJ's or Arthur's or wherever it would be and play whatever you want, actually. And then it's up to you to bring people in there and get it 5 quid, 10 quid in the door and make some money. There is no other country in the world you can do that in. None. In America, you can't do that. You have to pay to play. It costs so much money. And then so it gets very serious. But in this way, Ireland has always been very experimental that way. You can just put bands together, try them out, see if it's going to happen or not.
But you mentioned that you started writing songs. Did that just come naturally, or how did you learn how to write songs? Did you just start doing it?
Yeah, I just started doing it. Well, I realized it was a very practical realization. Okay, I'm going to form a band. What am I going to play? I'm not going to play other people's music. I'm going to write songs. So I'm going to form the band. I had this idea. I hadn't met the guys yet. It became the Bogey Boys. But I mean, so I started writing songs at about 14 or something, 15. But then started getting quite serious about it when I started thinking about, I was getting closer to forming my own band, which I formed at 18. Like I was a seasoned veteran at that point. But so I had a bucket load of songs if we got a record deal, which we did, and did the first album. I was all ready for that.
Were you the lead singer in the band?
I was, yeah.
And how did it work? Did you get the band touring around the place and recording?
We did. We were very. The drummer and I were working together with a singer-songwriter who's now a well-known DJ. He's Carl Corcoran, who does he was a singer-songwriter back then, and we were in his band, but it was kind of very, it wasn't very serious. He would do some gigs here and there, and Paul Moran was the drummer, and I said, look, I'm going to form a band. I'm getting out of this. I'm going to form my own band, a kind of hard rock, guitar-based thing, but with punk elements, because punk rock was beginning to happen. And he was into it, so we did that, and he introduced me to a bass player, and Donald Nagel, so we formed from that, and then we rehearsed in my house in Navan for a couple of weeks, and then I just rang people and pestered them and got gigs for us, and worked it up from there, worked it up from the very bottom. Our very first gig was in a little place called El Ruedo in Carlow, very exotic sounding name for Carlow, but and it was always very good to us. The first time we played there was people to see us. It was amazing, There was a kind of a little scene. Yeah. And you made 40 quid between everybody. It sort of covered all expenses and got us back, and a few pints and a few bob for whatever.
Is there like riffs or stuff from that time, Bogey Boys tunes that you can remember that you can play?
Sure, sure. We had our first single was based around. I don't have the right sound. Forgive the sound. Our first single was based around a riff like this. Can you see me there? So it wasn't traditional, silly heavy metal rock, which I was a fan of. but
Yeah.
I wanted to incorporate different harmonies at that point. I wanted to see if we could write 3-4 minute pop rock songs that had interesting harmony, maybe not just although I was a big fan of AC/DC and Lizzy and all that stuff, but just that kind of, those kind of, I wanted to try and avoid that if I could. So I was always looking for interesting chord progressions and stuff, which kind of was a double-edged sword. It means that people hear you and they go, "Oh, it's not really what we thought. It's not like the Jam, and it's not like Rory Gallagher. It's not like all these things." But I liked it.
Did you find musicians would appreciate what you're doing and say, "Oh,
Yes,
chord changes"?
yes. We got very respected very quickly in Dublin because we were, all guitar-based bands at the time had a bad reputation because it was kind of, even though I loved blues and we were blues-based as well, there was an awful lot of lazy type of blues band that would just do these long jams that went nowhere. And we said, no, from the beginning, it's going to be concise guitar solos, verse, chorus, bridge, solo, that kind of thing for each song. And it got everybody's attention.
And lots of guitar solos.
Lots of guitar solos. I didn't stretch them out until later on. Early on, we were very strict about, no, it's only 8 bars of guitar, 16 bars of guitar solo. And that meant it was good because you had to construct solos that were kind of interesting, and you didn't have a chance, so everything was thought out a little bit, what
I mean? And was the Bogey Boys like a full-time thing that you did for a while?
Yeah, 5 years. We did 2 albums, 3 singles. That's where the Rory Gallagher connection came in, because we'd only formed and we played in Carlow in the September, I think, and then got a couple of gigs. There was a place called the Magnet in Pierce Street we played, which is really rough gaff. And I went to the Bag It In, which was kind of the cooler place to play, and there was a guy called Charlie McGettigan, who I didn't know and he didn't know me, and I convinced him to give us a gig there. I was pretty, even though I was young and whatever, I was a pretty persuasive little character. And so we got a gig and we made sure that was full. We plastered it. In those times, you could just I had a high-ace van and we had loads of posters and we spray painted them and put them all over Dublin, totally illegally and everything. And, our very first gig in the Bag It In was like 300 people. It was amazing, right? And so we were all delighted with ourselves. And we're about to go on stage, and the guy that was doing our gear comes around and says, "Hey, Rory Gallagher's after coming in to the gig." I said, "You're kidding? Into our gig?" "Yeah." And he wants to know, can he meet you afterwards? So all the whole gig was tempered with that. Geez, Rory Gallagher's out there. It was just a dark pub, so you couldn't see much. But I'm looking to see if I could see him, but he was hidden back. And so sure enough, afterwards, he came up afterwards and he says, "Man, that was great." He said, "Will you open for me in the stadium? I do 5 nights at Christmas."
Right.
And so I said, "Of course we will." I was going to go anyway. And that was the start of a great relationship with him. He introduced us to his record company in London. They signed us. We recorded our second album in his studio in Victoria. In fact, I used his famous Strat on 2 or 3 of the tracks just to say I played it.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Yeah, he was a really generous, super guy. Really nice guy.
Do you think he's quite underrated as a player in general, like down here enough?
I think so. I know guitar players all know who he is. And when I moved to America, it was really interesting because not a lot of people had heard of him in the wider public, but all the musicians knew who he was. All the rock guys and all the blues guys were aware of him, because he toured a lot there. He never got maybe the stature he deserved, but he would be rated among the people that it would have mattered to him. I know the people like Slash and people that have come out and said they loved him,
Yeah.
I'm sure he would have been happy with that. He died too young, sadly.
Yeah. I've got a 10-year-old student really getting into Rory Gallagher now and trying to play Penny and stuff. It's great. I love.
Fantastic. That's it. And his guitar playing was wonderful, and you have to contextualize it as well. I mean, he was a constructivist. I followed his lead more than anything else, where he was all about the live show and all about, his technique was what it was, but he sacrificed everything for excitement and for performance, And it's so nowadays I wonder, and we talked about this very briefly, but when like Pat Metheny won't do that kind of. In his live show, he used to do a purely improvised thing, right? And he stopped doing it because people are filming it, and they get a bad bit, and they go, "Hey, Pat Metheny fail," and it's not that. It's you know, Rory would, I don't know how he'd deal with that now, because he always left it, lots of elements of danger and surprise in his live shows, which I loved.
Yeah, sure. We were talking about that, the risks involved if you're doing
Yeah,
something more improvised. Did you find when you were playing to bigger and bigger audiences, did that change the way you approached playing? Or
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you got that's a kind of a sad. Well, maybe it's not sad. It's a it's a reality that, from playing in the Magnet and the Baggot and places like that, where you're doing, or the Sportsman in Mount Marion, where you're playing to a captive audience and we're doing exactly it the way we want to do it, then you end up and you're playing with, touring with Thin Lizzy in Europe, and it's like, I don't know, 15,000 people a night, and you have a 40-minute slot, and you have to try and fit in, and then you start developing a show where it's like, I do this thing at this time every night, and then we do this thing, and then this thing happens, and you realize, wow, it's a bit of a circus now, isn't it? But and that's always been a kind of a what would you call it, a deal with the devil you make, the more successful. I have a theory about very successful bands like U2 and people like that, that they become victims of their own success, that
your
if Edge ever wanted to just break out, I don't know if he, I haven't seen him in a long time, but I, if he ever wanted to play something jazzy, it's just not, you're not allowed. You have to be the Edge all the time. Stop with that. You know what I mean? It has to be this. We're not going to listen to you play altered harmony. It's not going to
that's it. You have to change his name, go under a different name.
happen. Well, he has a real name as well, so we'll go back to that maybe.
Yeah. Trying to get him onto the show, so if I do, I'll ask him that question.
Yeah, because it's always intrigued me that, if you get so successful and so wealthy, that, why don't you do, some people have done it in the past, why don't you do a side project that is something that is totally different? Or do you just, I suspect that you become a victim of the confines or the parameters of what made you famous. So Edge will just be perfecting this stuff all the time, with all that stuff, all that carry on, just perfecting that, as opposed to moving on to looking at. Interestingly, I had Gary Moore was a big influence on me, but he wasn't a very pleasant chap. He was kind of very. And I remember asking him about. He had done 2 albums with John Heisman's Coliseum in the 70s, and I bought both of them, and I loved them. And John Heisman was a very famous jazz fusion guy, right? So they had all this amazing, it was like kind of Mahavishnu type of stuff, and Gary was playing over it. And it was amazing, but he was playing this like really aggressive rock guitar, blues guitar over it. And I remember asking him about that. I said, I love that. He said, I hated it. I hated both of those albums because I was out of my depth. These guys would talk about harmony I knew nothing about, and I wanted to take time out and study that, and I never had a chance because then I went back. He was too famous, essentially, to go back. But the bits he did learn, the bits he did study, were like, so it's like, I always used to show my students that, okay, we can all play. Okay, so what happens when you get this chord? You've got a B minor 7 flat 5. What do you do there? Well, I do. I'm waiting for So that was Gary's thing. He had the minor 7 flat 5 in Parisian Walkways and in a bunch of tunes that they'd use. So, and it was a kind of an amalgam of Blue Bossa and Roy Buchanan's The Messiah Will Come Again and Carlos Santana, all these things. But he didn't have the time he wasn't allowed the time by his career to go out and actually study that. It would have been interesting to see if he'd gone on further and learn, because I have a thing about, I love simple music. I've no problem. I love American country music. D, G, and A. That's absolutely fine. And for musicians, if you're studying music, it's my opinion that, well, yeah, you should learn as much about everything and then make that an aesthetic choice, not just all you know. And you've got the singer-songwriters. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all. But if it's an aesthetic choice, but if that's all you know, well, then you're going to run out of road eventually.
So when you got to, after the 5 years of the Bogey Boys, what happened after that? Where did you kind of go reset and look for something else to do, or did you get another offer and straight away and go off somewhere else?
Well, I had an offer in the middle of it, just at the beginning of it. Thin Lizzy did ask me to join them,
Right.
and we were just bringing our first album, and I would have loved to have joined Thin Lizzy because they were my favorite band. But in my opinion, again, arrogance and cockiness of youth, but I thought they'd passed their peak, and they were still a big band, very big band. But at that point, I realized, no, I prefer to stay with my own thing at this point, see it through. So I wouldn't say I regretted it, but there were times I did when I ended up playing in some horrible little place that with nobody at it, because invariably most musical careers, like political careers, end in failure of some sort. And but with the Bogey Boys, we ended up in America and we were touring there, and a chapter of accidents happened. So I ended up living in America for 10 years. I broke the band up there and stayed there. So I lived in Detroit for a number of years. So that was great because that was my opportunity to look at people like Norma Jean Baker, and Ralph Armstrong, these people I idolized who were living there. Chad Smyth, Chad from the Chili Peppers, we had a band in Detroit together.
Really?
And yeah, we moved to LA at the same time. Anyway, so I was living in Detroit, and so I got to work with all these interesting people, like black music. I played with some black, just soul. I was the only white guy in the band, this kind of thing. So that's what I wanted, more of that. Not a great career move, particularly, but definitely more educational for me. So, and from that, I formed a band, of course, and we became very successful in that area. We toured and we got signed to Epic, and we went to tour with. We were kind of light metal, kind of, again, the same thing, trying to incorporate better harmony, which I never got very successful at particularly, but I still tried. And from there, after a few years living in the Midwest in Detroit, Vivian Campbell, who was a friend of mine, Vivian rang me and said, what's happening with the Epic record? We'd done an album, and then Epic Records had changed personnel and the album wasn't coming out, but we toured an awful lot with all kinds of bands, Bon Jovi and Quiet Riot and Nazareth. And then he said, do you want to come out to LA? And I'm moving to Whitesnake and I have a band formed. I want you to front it. And so I moved to LA and joined that band, and we were signed to EMI Manhattan, a record label. And it was coincidentally two Irish guys, a three-piece again, because it suited me perfect. That's what Vivian liked as well. And he'd been playing with Dio, then he formed this band, and then he went to Whitesnake, who were huge at the time. They were like enormous MTV rock stars. So that got me to LA, and from there I started working with the most interesting people altogether. Really interesting. All my favorite drummers from Steely Dan. I worked with Eddie Green, Rick Marotta, Richie Hayward from Little Feat. All these guys I ended up in these little circles with and learning all the time, Yeah.
When you were at that point, when you're playing with all those guys, were you like practicing a lot?
Yes.
And did you get lessons, or did you just like study with any of them, or did you just pick things up and practice?
I didn't get lessons per se. I was giving lessons actually because I had a really good knowledge of music theory. So I'm in the GIT in Hollywood. They got Steve Lukather. I hate dropping names here. It's terrible. But I told you my joke. You must never ever drop names. You know who told me that? Jimmy Page. But anyway, so it was Steve. Luke came down to a gig and he was playing with us, and he knew Vivian, and he said, "Man, you should teach in the GIT. You know all the stuff about harmony and stuff." So I did some lessons. I did some teaching there for a while. Not much, but a little bit. But from there, then I moved. From that band, there was a girl called Toni Childs who had just signed to A&M Records, and I hooked up with her, and that took off. That's where we started getting Grammys, and we went #1 in Japan, Australia, and we toured for 7 years. I toured as our MD and guitar player.
Right. And so you and her would write the songs together?
Not always, but certainly with the last album we did totally together, yes. We started writing in LA and then we moved to England, and we were in India for a little while. Then we back to Peter Gabriel's. Peter's on it, and we did it all in Realworld. So we were writing together at that point, yeah.
And recorded in Realworld Studios?
Yeah, for months, yeah.
Wow, that must have been interesting.
Really interesting, because that was the halcyon days of that. And Peter Gabriel is a very generous gentleman as well, and he's very interested in bringing musics together. I mean, on that album we had Rick Marotta playing drums with Manu Katché, we had Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who was the Pakistani Diwali singer. With all the most interesting everybody, we were just grabbing people and bringing them in and recording stuff. It was amazing, you know.
And how did the songwriting go at that point? Would you actually sit together and work on the songs back and forth and try and...
Yeah, at that time, yeah, it was just pre-Pro Tools and ADATs and all that stuff. We did have ADATs actually, but we had a house. She had a house in Hampstead, so I was kind of moving back here. I was kind of living in America, but back over here. So I go to Hampstead, you know, every week, and we spent 3 or 4 days just writing songs and coming up with stuff for the album.
Can you remember anything you wrote at that point? Those kind of songs?
Yeah, sure. Off that album, yeah, there was I kind of remembered. I did a kind of a Beatles thing. It wasn't particular because it wasn't a guitar band. I played a lot of keyboards in the band.
Nice. Lovely stuff. So, you want to play something else now? What the track you were going to play, the Mike Stern track, is that?
Okay.
How come you? Why did you pick that one? Chromosome.
Because it was on the just here in front of me.
Ah, right.
Lazy. And so I'm gonna give this with the caveat that I haven't played guitar all week. So guitar players, don't be too hard on me. This is a tune called Chromosome. And then when I was in Dublin about 10, 15 years ago, myself and Derek O'Connor, Doc is a fantastic sax player. We formed a band where we would just do fusion music, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we started writing a lot of stuff. I don't have any of that to play, but this is one of the first covers we did at the time.
Cool. And
Mike Stern.
While you're listening there, we did a little sound check earlier, so the sound is kind of as good as we can get it. And if you have any questions, just fire them into the, or you can raise your hand and we can get you talking, asking Jimmy a question, or just
sure thing. I'll play through this and let you sort out the Q&A. How's that?
Nope.
All right.
Woo! The one
That's my
audio.
mic back on again, I think. Yeah, there we go. Sorry
Cool.
about the feedback at the beginning there. It's
No problem.
technologically. Does that sound okay there? It sounds kind of weird here, but anyway.
Ah, this is sounded great.
Thank you.
The sound on Zoom isn't the best, but we could hear you playing amazing
That's
stuff.
fair. Fair enough.
Grooving.
Thank you.
That's a great melody. It's like crazy.
A very outside melody. Yes, that's what that's really got me all about it. It's very kind of minor Lydian melody, if that's even a thing. All flat fives and stuff. It's cool.
It's great. I'm gonna have to learn that now.
It's a good one for guitar players to learn. It's a little bit of a tricky one because, as you see, I was stumbling a lot there. I haven't been practicing, but it doesn't fall under your fingers very easily.
Is Mike Stern someone did you ever see him playing before?
Yes, saw him play many times. Anytime I was in New York, he does a gig in the 55 bar in Greenwich Village, and I would go down and see him there. Tiny little place, so
Yeah.
he'd be standing right beside the toilets, playing away. And it meant that during his break, you could chat to him, and if he was in a good mood, he'd talk. You know what I mean?
Cool.
If he wasn't, he wouldn't.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in from Brian.
Cool.
Anyone else questions? Just fire them in there. So the first question is, what would be your 3 Desert Island albums, guitars, and pedals?
Whoa. Okay. Albums would be Asia by Steely Dan, without a doubt. The last record album by Little Feat. And probably a compendium of Debussy's greatest piano pieces. That'll be the albums. What's the second one? Guitars?
Yeah, guitars, second.
Well, the guitars, a Les Paul. I always like a Les Paul. This PRS, which I've recently bought, I love it. I would bring this, and probably a Stratocaster. Pedals, a compressor, a delay, and an overdrive. That's fine.
Cool. So Debussy, is Debussy a big influence? Someone you listen to?
Yes, I think, and I love to play some of his pieces on piano, even though I'm very rusty on piano now. But when I heard Claire de Lune the first time, I thought, wow, he wrote that in 1911, I think, and it's like those clusters, 13ths, and this is like, this harmony was unheard of, really.
Hmm.
You know, there's Fauré and people have done it before, and Beethoven and Mozart to some degree, but not like this rich kind of, it preempted, you know, it was like Bill Evans or something for me, you know.
Yeah. Do you know
I
the
love Debussy.
story about Debussy in the conservatory in Paris? One of my teachers used to tell us the story that like we would write these crazy pieces, and then his composition teacher would say, "What system are you using? What system of harmony?" And he said, "Mon plaisir."
Mon plaisir, fantastic,
Yeah,
isn't
man.
that wonderful? And that's another thing for guitarists. It's like, don't get caught up in, you know, my daughter, who's an artist in her own right, she has a new record out, by the way, just coming out in a couple of days. She's called Trophy Wife, and her new record is coming out next week. But she studied in music in Trinity, and uh, they were dealing largely with Baroque harmony. And then she came to BIM and did a diploma year there, and she's going, "Oh, the harmony's different. What's all good?" I said, "Well, then we deal with like jazz harmony, well, you know, what they call jazz harmony from 49 on, maybe."
Mm.
Uh, which pretty much contradicts nearly everything, you know, with figured bass and what you're allowed to do and what you're not to, and you know, the devils, the tritone and all that stuff. Jazz is the opposite of that, as is rock. You know, you know, parallel fifths. Where would heavy metal be without parallel fifths? Seriously, you know what I mean?
But you know the thing about the tritone being the devil's interval
Uh huh.
quotes. There's a really great video I saw a few months ago by Adam Neely, the YouTube music theory guy, and he kind of looks at the history of where that came from, and there's not really any truth to that idea that
It's
it,
what
in the
I think the Vatican disliked it. I think, you know, a lot of great church music, you know, Gregorian stuff, and there's a great video by Leonard Bernstein on the history of harmony. Kind of, he's encapsulated into about 5 minutes on a YouTube video. Check it out. But
that
yeah,
where he
the
talks
myth
about
came.
the language of music.
Yes,
It comes from language. That's amazing. Yeah, seen that.
it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But the tritone thing, yeah, but it was an well, like, you know, there's a book all students should read, in my opinion, and it's a book by Jamie James called "The Music of the Spheres." Have you heard of that?
The music of the spheres. No, actually.
It's Take a note. It's fantastic. It's probably out of print. It might be difficult. Philip Donnelly. Philip was an old friend. Somebody asked a question there. I saw that. Philip recently died. I loved Philip's playing. Philip was very stylized, you know, but he was more of a songwriter than a guitar player, and he was happy with that. But anyway, this book by Jamie James, and it talks about Pythagoras and the monochord, and, you know, Pythagoras with the without getting into too much mathematics and stuff, but he had this idea that the Greeks had an idea that if they could figure out what the celestial harmony was, that we could communicate with the universe, right?
Right.
So they had 8 planets. You know, Pluto was a planet at this point,
Yeah.
and Pythagoras tried to work that out, and that's where we ended up with the diatonic scale. He came up with the one, the perfect four, the perfect five, and the one, and we've argued over the 2, 3, 6, 7 since then, you know,
Yeah.
and then the tritones and all that stuff. Every time anything new was the tempered third, anytime there was a new major step made in harmony, there was a huge outcry about it. So the tritone was the most famous one, the devil's interval, but
Yeah.
because it is on the surface, is a very unpleasing interval, you know.
And have you looked into anything with different tuning systems other than 12 tone equal temperament? Play.
Not so much. I did have a look at the 432 hertz tuning
Yeah.
for acoustic guitars, and I don't care what science says. I do actually. I follow science very much, but when I tune an acoustic guitar to that and set it up and record it, it definitely sounds more resonant.
Huh. Interesting.
You know, so I have a plan. I'm going to make an acoustic track at some, just acoustic, all tuned to 432, and see if it sounds more pleasing. I think it does.
Well, do blindfold, double blindfold tests for that.
We'll do a double blind. We'll get that together, yourself and myself, Daniel, at some point.
So Pat asked here, you kind of answered, but I'll call out the question. Would Jimmy also rate Philip Donnelly as one of the greats with Rory, Gary, and of course himself?
Philip was never one of those guys. Philip was a very I rated him very highly. I loved him as a musician and a songwriter particularly, and just a general guy he wasn't a very egotistical guitar player. He was quite happy to just contribute the least amount, you know. Sometimes he wouldn't play anything at all,
Mm.
and that, there are people, Artie McGlynn and Henry McCullough, people like that. There were a few guys I met like that, and they always humbled me because I never had that much humility. If somebody asked me to play, I would play, and Philip wouldn't. It was amazing, and it's a real humbler, and I rate him very highly. But he would never want to be in the same pantheon as Rory Gallagher, and he wanted to be remembered as a songwriter.
And any Dublin gigs planned after COVID, Pat asked.
I'll be playing every night I can after COVID if that's possible, but I don't see that for a good while.
We don't know when it will be.
No.
So, and Brian Nugent also asked, where do you get backing tracks from? Like the Chromosome backing track, is that a...
They're easy to find on YouTube. They're right there. Just put in Chromosome backing track and you'll find. You have to do a bit of sifting. Some of them are kind of crappy, but a lot of them are very good.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you as well, in terms of guitar technique, bending and vibrato, those two things, do you have any things to say about that, approaching practicing them, how to, it's like so different between two different guitar players, how it sounds?
Yes.
And
it's a very interesting thing, and I was very influenced by country music very young, and I would play. That sounds dirty or not. I'm going to take this headphone off, but so I would listen to people like Roy Buchanan and to Merle Haggard and people like that, where they would have the American country guitar players were very into bending strings, and Roy Buchanan was the best. That was fantastic, and I just loved his playing. So listening to people like that and emulating, because again, it's the old thing, imitate, innovate. So if you listen to Roy Buchanan, it's very good. Practicing is that's the thing. If you can see my hand here, there are things. Jerry Donahue would do these type of bends. So you have an A chord here, okay, in the C position up here. So you go. So it's almost like steel guitar type of thing.
Sounds like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you use that, I use that a lot myself. I love that sound, love that texture, and you can get different intervals. If you can get these intervals here, like tenths, where. It does require a good bit of practice to get finger independence, so as you can hold one note and then move the other, vibrate the other. So that's just dogged practice, I think.
Yeah, that sounds great. Students of mine, take note. We're going to be working on those things for a while. Pat asked as well, are you planning to gig with Karen O'Sullivan Holmes?
Carrie is, I'm her producer and we're great friends, and I've produced her last 5 singles. We plan on, we've just done an EP where I'm playing the banjo only, which is an interesting little aesthetic we chose during lockdown. The EP is available. If you want to get in touch with me, it's available for €9. But anyway, she is a wonderful singer and a great songwriter. So yes, we planned. We did a tour last year of the UK with Rumour, the singer, and we'll do more work, but after COVID, Yeah. So we're working on a couple of singles for Carrie at the moment, and yes, I will definitely do some gigs with her. She's fantastic.
And another question from Brian. Any advice for an 18, 19-year-old trying to start a band?
Don't be too, I don't want to say lower your standards, but it's more important to get, I presume you're a guitar player, Ryan. It's more important to get a sympathetic bass player and drummer, for instance, if it was three-piece, than a brilliant bass player and drummer, because that leads to all kinds of problems. My understanding of forming a band is that probably you have some song ideas. You want someone that's going to help you with them and make you sound as good as you can. They don't necessarily have to be the best players, So you don't need to be looking for the next Dave Weichel. The kid next door to you might be just, and he can improve,
Interesting. And how about as a producer? Like, how did you work on becoming a better producer or producing people?
Well, when I was very young again, and these are interesting names because people will have their own preconceptions, but I was in a band in Castleblaney, County Monaghan for a while, for a couple of years. And the big guy there was a fellow called Big Tom, who was a famous country and Irish singer, right? So I kind of vaguely knew him, but I wasn't blaming him or anything. But he opened a studio. He built a studio there in Castleblaney. This is like unheard of in the 70s, right? And I went down to him one day, and I wanted to get into studio. I wanted to get into figuring out how capstans worked and inputs and patch bays and all that stuff. And I went down to him. I said, "Listen, I'm playing." Oh, he says, "I know who you are. You're playing with that girl Shelley." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to know, will you let me go into your studio when there's nobody there?" He said, "There's the keys. Knock yourself out." So I pretty much lived in that studio for a couple of years. And I ended up doing engineering, playing guitar, backing vocals, mixing, doing whatever, figuring it out I have to thank him for it. And that's where my interest began. And then I moved to Dublin and started doing a lot of sessions. And I always wanted to produce records. So I did, just before the advent of Pro Tools, I'd done a good bit of production with various artists, with Toni in America, but with Irish artists, Don Baker and people like that. So then when Pro Tools came along, I got that very quickly, and I'm constantly learning about that. I'm very interested in the aesthetics of sound and why, and how, if you're a guy who can play all kinds of virtuoso stuff, that's not always what's necessary. Maybe it's really important. One of the most important things in recording is to be able to do this. That's a lot more difficult than anybody thinks. And when you're recording, that's where anybody can play a solo, because a solo to most people is just a bunch of random notes. They're not sure they're waiting for the singer to start again. It's all about the rhythm and pocket and understanding how to play with a drummer and a rhythm section. And then with the orchestral work, I've done a lot of orchestral work over the last years, and that's been a good learning curve too, because when you're playing in the concert hall and you have to do that, you have to do this for 8 bars. You would be surprised how difficult that is when there's 2,000 people watching you, and all you have is a conductor looking at you, and then you're hoping you're right, and the strings come in, and it's very exposed, and it's a big learning experience, and it's all the hard stuff is easy when it comes to that.
Yeah, when I was talking to Jake Curran a few weeks back and asking him what he was working on, he was saying the same thing, and he's just working on playing very simple stuff and nailing it, and it's not easy.
And a lot of guitar players are doing this stuff now, where we're messing around with metronomes, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because we tend to put metronome doc, 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 and then the jazz thing is to put it on 2 and 4. And I know Jake and I did a gig together there a couple of months ago, just before all this went down. And we're good friends, and he's a fantastic player. So we did a little gig, and we were talking about this, that we've been putting the metronome at weird times and leaving just that click and trying to play in between in 4/4 or whatever.
Yeah.
And checking our timing to see. It's not just about perfect timing, but can we do that with a sense of groove and all that stuff? It's quite a challenge to try it,
Yeah, he was talking about that, putting the metronome on the last 16th note.
There you go, yeah. You have to try and battle with it. Is that the one? Oh no, it's not the one. It's the and of the 4. It's the and of the 4, and it's a real head wreck. It's good fun.
Question in from Declan: do you have any warm-up exercises that you do?
Very few, but there is one I like to do. It's this one here, where you can start with if you want to completely start on the 15th fret and play an F major 7. Right? Oh, see this. up on getting into finger independence. That's one I do, and then I just play scales.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And from Pat, have you ever gigged with Brendan Bonas?
I know Brendan very well. Yeah, I've
Step
gigged with
aside.
him way back in the day. Yeah, he was in Step Aside and lives in Spain now. I know Brendan well. Lovely telecast career from that.
Cool. That's all the questions. So we're just coming up to the hour. Do you want to plug
Oh,
this, Donna Lee, was it?
do you want to hear some Donna Lee?
Yeah.
Do they? They last the guys, do they?
Okay. Who wants to hear Donna Lee? Go on. Say yes.
Say yes, whatever. I don't know what this will sound like, and I haven't practiced, so I'm just making excuses, which we
Yes.
should never do, ladies and
Yes.
gentlemen.
Brian,
Don't
say
make excuses. I'm not even sure there's a countdown in this, but anyway, let's see what happens. And it's been a pleasure. Am I leaving you at this? Is that we're going to sign off on this?
yeah, afterwards we'll say a few words and say goodbye.
Cool. Let me just mute the mic then. So the mic is here. Here we go. And it ended there without any warning. Sorry, but I didn't get to play the head again. Apologies.
No worries. That was amazing. That was the first time I've heard a quote from a sea shanty in Donnelly.
Sorry about that. Couldn't resist.
Loved it. Brilliant. So thank you all for listening in. I threw your Facebook page up there, Jimmy. If anyone wants to contact you for a lesson, they can contact you through your Facebook page.
Thank you, Daniel.
And yeah, again, the EP is coming out, and Trophy Wife as well. So you
Trophy Wife going out next week. Watch out for her. Check her out on Instagram, Facebook, all of the usual social media platforms.
And yeah, that's it. Next week we have Kevin Rowe. You know Kevin Rowe.
Kevin's one of my ex-students. Fantastic guy.
There you go. Kevin's going to be here next week. Register on Eventbrite. We'll throw the link up on Facebook and all those.
Tell him that I said he was a punk. He'll know what I mean.
I'll tell him. Cool.
Talented punk.
That's all for tonight. I'm going to